and surrounded it with rhetoric saying that this is a way for women on the home front to directly contribute to national defense. So in modeling ideal American womanhood to girls that are in the process of developing into women was truly a service that was patriotic and helped us win the war on the home front.
Was the kind of like information coming from the top truly secular, or was there like anything that they had to be careful of, like to include, or I guess to appeal to like all religions and races and classes?
In terms of religion, the Girl Scouts kind of defining distinction between themselves and the Boy Scouts was that it was secular. So that was very kind of close to their identity as an organization. I didn't see any outward comments about religion in the material I looked at, but it was, they very deliberately wanted to not only be coming from church groups and to expand outside of those community centers.
I don't know if there are the distinctions yet between Brownies and Girl Scouts, but was there like a difference in the experiences between like the younger girls and the older girls?
Yeah, so there were the different classes at this point, in like a hierarchy system, and because these older girls in the intermediate and senior scouting programs were closer to womanhood, they were allowed to have experiences more based in hard skill development. And so this is actually one of my third crisis project, was finding that there were groups training Girl Scouts who were between ages of 15 to 18 and preparing them to enter into the women's auxiliary military groups such as Waves and WACS. So because they weren't really sure when the war was going to end, they wanted to make sure a generation of girls would be very quickly able to enter into these organizations and serve and already know flight patterns and like technical skills that they would immediately be able to apply.
Sort of jumping off of that, were you able to get any sense of how many of those senior scouts transitioned into the Waves and WACS?
Not entirely. I would answer that in two parts. The first is that these programs started in like 1942, 43, and by the time they had fully been flushed out and available, the war was close to its end, and so there was really no need. And the second part was, although these programs existed, it didn't necessarily mean that it was accessible to all girls that wanted to participate in it. Again, it was up to the regional council to decide if they wanted to have this type of opportunity for girls. And even after that, to have the resources of timing, leisure, and planning this, and people to be able to teach these skills is very much a privilege and wasn't accessible in a lot of places. And most of these senior scouts, they're called the Wings program and the Waves program, were mostly located on the East Coast, close to cities. So I imagine that the makeup of participants were mostly upper middle class in urban areas.
I was just wondering how much you saw like in the education the girls were receiving, or the experience discussion of like being future mothers or future wives, or if that was kind of not a part of like their tune down for that information.
Yeah, this was interesting. I thought I was going to focus more on that in the beginning than I actually ended up focusing on. And it's really nuanced in the sense that they wanted to prepare girls to fully engage with this world that they were living in. And there's a lot of discussion on, oh, we're not like our mother's generation or our grandmother's generation. Like we can work and we can, be recreational and be physically fit. But you still have to know how to set the table. You still need to be able to have skills in childcare. So rather than a more egalitarian view, it was like you had a higher expectation for the work that you're going to do as a woman. Not only were you going to be domestic, but you also have these opportunities to contribute in a real way towards society. So even in instances of like outdoor life and camping, like every single guide I read said that girls must be instructed in how to set the table and how to present dishes. And it was all about efficiency and resource use, but it was still, you have to know how to do this, you know how to prepare guests and like set the home up and take care of children.
So I know that you mentioned that like it seems like there's a lot of like militaristic like just imagery. It's like Girl Scout troop and the uniforms and the marching in that picture and like the flags. And during World War II, this kind of meshed nicely with like we might need these women to fight if it goes really badly. And I know so this is a little outside the scope, but prior to World War II, where there wasn't that strain or that stress that might have needed women to serve, was there any tensions as a result of the kind of like these kind of like militaristic tones within the Girl Scouts versus like what a girl/a woman should be?
Yeah. They were always very inherently patriotic and American in their identity as scouts. I would say that there was, and this was very like a random document that I found in a folder, and I couldn't find anything else on it, so I really have no reason to include it in anything that I've done. But I did see one letter and like report on communism and how communistic behavior could be occurring in these camps, and that was something that we had to look out for prior to World War II. But again, there was one source. I think people really appreciated the uniform as a sense of recognition, and that if you see a Girl Scout with a uniform, you know that she had a standard skill set, and kind of even morality, I would argue, and sense of patriotism. So I don't think it was necessarily threatening. I think it was especially comforting, even in like the public sphere, to wear that uniform and have the insignia, and even just the badges as like a visual like recognition of like, oh, look at all the skills she has, like she can do that and that. It's like all just like right on you.
Right. Did you look into like how like technically effective victory gardens work? Or are they mostly like placebo kind of like make you feel good about your good farming?
I don't have like I would think it'd be hard to find statistics that could really communicate the effectiveness of a victory garden. I would say that there was a lot of energy surrounding victory gardens in general, and for Girl Scouts, I would say that was even more so. And that there was a very common amount of surplus produced from these victory gardens, and so that was a very like real effect that these troops would have in their community, because they would make way too much, they would plant too much, and because they were all so excited, had a lot of time on their hands, I don't know, and then they would have too much, and then they would have to practice canning practices, and they would have collection centers for this surplus food and give it out to their community. And then I would also say that, especially in the camp setting, if the camp had a victory garden, they would instead like use as much of their own food as they possibly could, so it added to a sense of sustainability, and it really did like not purchasing, not having to use those food rationing tickets. It was like the little things, but I would think it would add up, especially because it happened on such a large scale through an organization with a large membership base.
Could you talk about some of the other things the government enlisted Girl Scouts to do in the world?
Of course.
The world?
Probably the second, if not just like quite the similar like scope, would be the salvaging campaign. So salvaging is the collection of scrap materials ranging from rags and cloth to metal, aluminum, and Girl Scouts were also involved in war bond drives, and they would do that through having like using their own money to buy war bonds, or encouraging others to purchase war bonds themselves. And in doing so, you would often like receive a certificate, which I came across a lot of in my research, like, you bought a Jeep for the Army with like all the money you've raised. And so they did this by trying to be more thrifty as a unit of a troop, and doing all these ceremonial things to promote the purchase of war bonds. There's also some collaboration with existing programs for youth at the time, such as like Farm Corps, which is kind of similar to Victory Gardens, but not quite the same. And there was a lot of kind of managing how we're going to coordinate these programs, because Girl Scouts have long been involved with outlets for recreation and service for girls, because it was part of their identity since its beginning. And so when the US government kind of expanded during this time, they were creating all these programs. They're like, oh, let's do this, let's do this. And the Girl Scouts had already these existing programs, and so kind of like maneuvering and like trying to bring that in together occurred a lot in a lot of like very small ways.
Question? Dr. Worthy?
So were they a focus of the National Youth Administration then? For what the Boy Scouts were doing and what the Girl Scouts were doing? Is that how it got funneled through the government, is through the National Youth Administration?
It was primarily through the Children's Bureau.
Okay. All right. Which the Youth Administration must be a older age children.
Yeah, there was,
I
I
guess.
mean, there was a lot of like just acronyms and like
Sure.
government agencies and bureaus and offices like doing very similar, if not the same things, kind of just like blowing up. I didn't run into that one at all, but the Children's Bureau was one that I did.
And then were they having efforts coordinated with the Boy Scouts, or were most of the things the Girl Scouts were doing by themselves, just the Girl Scouts?
So I actually didn't run into a collaboration with the Boy Scouts as much as I anticipated.
Okay. Or Campfire Girls? No?
A little bit,
Okay.
just as much as the Boy Scouts. I really only came across that when looking at meeting minutes or conference reports or notes, when youth organizations or recreational organizations would have conferences about wartime needs and resource management, how to continue recreation and like youth service in a time of war. And then the Boy Scouts and the Campfire Girls would be in attendance and they would collaborate. But other than that, I didn't see quite as much collaboration as I imagined.
Did you find any rhetoric from like the Girl Scout pledge that they would do every I mean, I don't know if they actually did this in the 40s. I'm definitely being ahistorical and talking about my own Girl Scout experience. But if they used that pledge in the 40s, did you see that rhetoric kind of intertwined to encourage patriotism amongst the girls?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of ceremonial patriot spirit building. One of the ways is through the Girl Scout Promise and all of the songs. And then I would also say that during this time there were a lot of songs and games and like plays and sayings that were being created and distributed through the national organization. And again, it was up to these regional councils or maybe like the camp to employ these and give them to girls to use. But they all were kind of like connecting food programs or like Victory for Food, salvaging, being thrifty, to like you are being a war hero and you're a Girl Scout and like you're at a camp and like let's sing, and like a lot of plays kind of tying everything together. And so those were a lot of resources that were created at the national level and then distributed, or even sometimes created by individual troops and picked up by the national level and then again distributed for use depending on desire.